Where monsters rampage, I'm there to take them down. Where treasure glitters, I'm there.
Coming as a surprise to absolutely no one, I'm a fan of Japanese animation, and one of my favorites is Slayers, often described by many as what Dungeons & Dragons inevitably winds up looking like. More specifically, it's a high fantasy comedy where things are seldom taken seriously until the world is ending. It was a show that was well received when it was brought over to North America in the 90s, even though it's now kind of been forgotten like so many other things that got washed in the modern flood of pop culture. Though it was well enough received at the time that Guardians of Order decided to publish not one, nor two, but 3 sourcebooks adapting Slayers to their game Big Eye Small Mouth. But if that wasn't enough, they also tried their hand at adapting Slayers to the d20 system, and it played out much differently than many of their other such adaptations. Instead of using their d20 version of Big Eye Small Mouth, Slayers D20 just reinvented Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition. This effectively makes it just another one of a long list of games bearing the d20 suffix, though I dare to say it's one of the more remarkable entries. Slayers D20 requires an initial understanding of how Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 works. This book throws you into the deep end in that regard. Even those familiar with D&D 3.5 might still have some trouble with Slayers D20 though, since it rewrites almost everything. And just to make matters all the more confusing, there's still a few details that were only selectively rewritten, if not left untouched completely. Let's start from the top though. Human is the only race from D&D 3.5 that's still available. Besides that, there's only 2 other races available, Dragon and Beastman. Dragons, as one might expect, are tremendously overpowered. Many of their abilities rely on some of the new mechanics Slayers D20 introduces, as well as a few that remain the same from vanilla D&D 3.5, such as damage resistance. Beastmen are actually what make up a bulk of the race options in this game, since it's kind of a blanket race that represents all kinds of anthropomorphized animals, ranging from bears to lizards to even fish. There's also several racial templates available as well, just in case you wanted to make your character into even more of a unique and special snowflake. If it isn't obvious by this point, Slayers D20 kicks the overall power level of the game to something much higher than what Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 was. Thematically, this is appropriate, especially when you consider that this is the main character's staple maneuver.
Dragon Slave!
Many classes in Slayers D20 share names with those from Dungeons & Dragons 3.5. Even if this is the case, they don't necessarily share the same abilities. Especially since in Slayers D20, there's a little thing called defense bonus that characters get if they're not wearing any armor. I won't go over all of them since there's actually quite a few different classes. In fact, the amount of base and prestige classes suggests that multiclassing is not only expected, but encouraged in Slayers D20. There's even one class called the Lore Master, which has the entire shtick of being a class that grants all kinds of abilities that anybody with a second class could benefit from. Most of the skills present in Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 are still present and unchanged in Slayers D20. However, there are quite a few skills that have been added that are similar to what would otherwise have been handled by spells. Specifically, Summoning and Vision, which would have been handled by Conjuration and Divination families of spells. There's also the Reputation skill that directly improves the Leadership feat, as well as a few other social skill rolls. And speaking of social skills, another one called Taunt is added. Taunt plays a pivotal role in the psychological warfare subsystem that they added. Slayers D20 also has a laundry list of feats that are no longer available in Slayers D20, and perhaps an equally long list of feats that were changed. Most of what was updated were things that now pertain to the magic system, and several of the new feats were ones pertaining to appearances, social roles, and psychological warfare. And with so much new material dedicated to the subsystem, I think it at least bears mentioning. Psychological warfare in Slayers D20 gives additional use for social roles beyond getting NPCs to do things for you. Various skill rolls can be made to cause a character to gain some level of fear, confusion, or embarrassment, in addition to dealing non-lethal damage. It's a little odd that words can be used to cause damage, but from a pragmatic standpoint, this does open another way of interrupting a spellcaster, in the form of breaking their concentration by heckling them. In fact, I think the computer game Planescape Torment had a character that could do that, but I digress. This is probably one of the sections that doesn't get altered too much, since a lot of the common items present in Dungeons & Dragons will likely be present in any fantasy setting, Slayers included. Additionally, magic item creation remains mostly intact as well. Slayers D20 does add a few new magic items that take advantage of the new magic system. Particularly, these new items raise a character's magical ability. Granted, those sort of things existed in D&D 3.5, but these new ones are described using the new set of rules. Which, speaking of, magic received the biggest overhaul in Slayers D20. It's been completely rewritten. All the spells from Dungeons & Dragons are gone, replaced instead by a completely different spell list. Additionally, while spell slots are still a thing, they're only used to determine how many spells your character can learn. The amount of spell slots a character has is equal to their intelligence bonus, though certain classes may raise this number as well. This also means that anybody can learn magic, even if they're a non-spellcaster class. When a character knows a spell and wishes to cast it, they first make a fortitude check to see if they successfully cast the spell. Each spell has a difficulty class number they're trying to beat, and there's a chart here showing what happens depending on how well you pass or fail. This first roll affects how much drain your character takes, as well as the result of casting the spell, with exceptionally high successes halving how much damage you take from drain, but failures doubling the amount. Furthermore, a failure also means that a roll needs to be made to see if the spell remains in the caster's control. This second roll, should it come up, is based on the DC of the spell originally cast, minus 10. Now, if you've noticed that some of the DCs for these spells are kind of ridiculous, to the effect of 50, I think it's worth noting that there are a few extra ways to gain bonuses to these checks. Keeping in theme with the show, a character can shout out the name of the spell they're casting for a +5 bonus to casting it. And for a further +5 bonus, a character can take a full action round to recite the incantation associated with their spell. And in keeping with Guardians of Order's usual shtick with any RPG they put out based on an anime, they not only have a guide to the show in question, but also a few color spreads of the concept art. If you've seen any of my other videos about Guardians of Order, you already know my thoughts on this. It was necessary for the time, and I think it's a nice touch, but it's made obsolete by the explosive growth of the internet. This isn't by any means the last supplement they've made for Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 though, even with its advertisements for Besem D20 in the back. In fact, this version I have is actually a second edition that was released in August of 2003, a year after its first printing. Besem D20, on the other hand, originally came out in May of 2003, meaning this game narrowly avoided the fate that Hellsing and Trigun D20 wound up receiving. I digress though. What I was about to talk about before I got caught up in a whirlwind of dates was another one of their books called Advanced D20 Magic, which describes itself as being a skill-based magic system, compatible with any D20-based game. Which, this is a modus operandi we've seen in Guardians of Order before. Produce a system for a specific anime, then adapt it into something more universal. In fact, on the first page of the Advanced D20 Magic, you come face to face with the basics of the magic system that was presented in Slayers D20. So that's Slayers D20. It's one of the better entries of the Guardians of Order library, although I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the game hasn't aged well, and it's thus probably not a game I'm going to bring up to any of the gaming groups I'm a part of. Anything with D20 appended to the end of it is usually met with revulsion, and even if that isn't the case, Slayers is a very old show at this point. But nonetheless, it's still one of my favorites. So, with all that said, I am Untitled, and I will see you all next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give me a like. And if you happen to also be a fan of Slayers, tell us who your favorite character is in the comments and why you like them. Personally, Zelgadis Greyswords is my favorite. He seems to be the only sane one in the group, and he makes the rest of the group's sociopathic behavior even funnier by comparison. So, with all that said, who of the Slayers do you like?